Late on the night of July 10, 2001, the North Ryde Police Department in New South Wales, Australia, received an unexpected distress call. Someone shot my parents. I think they're all bleeding. They're on the floor. What suburb are you in? They're not breathing. What do I do? What suburb are you in? North or North Ryde? Yes. And your parents have been shot, have they? I don't know. This is my... Yes, we will. We will. We're sending an ambulance now. Police officers and medical personnel quickly arrived at the scene, only to find that, out of a family of 4, only one person had survived. Seeing him huddled in the corner of the garage, the officers couldn't help but feel heartbroken by what had occurred. However, to their surprise, just 3 days after the incident, he was already anxiously inquiring about the inheritance. At the funeral of his relatives, he sang the song One Sweet Day. Later, this man used the government compensation to purchase a luxury car, behavior that naturally raised suspicions among the police. It turned out to be a story full of lies and greed. He had deceived his parents, relatives, and friends, and even lied to himself. Since his conviction in 2004, he has always maintained his innocence. However, on April 3, 2023, his appeal was once again denied. As of now, he remains in prison. So what exactly happened back then? Let's go back to 2001 to uncover the details of this case. The incident took place in North Ryde, a suburb in New South Wales near Macquarie University, often referred to as the Silicon Valley of Australia. This area is home to many high-tech companies like Microsoft, HP, Oracle, and 3M. North Ryde boasts a convenient transportation system with both a train station and numerous bus routes, only 15 kilometers from the central business district, making it an ideal location for the middle class to settle. The Gonzalez family's mansion was located at 6 Collins Street, North Ryde. It was a 2-story villa with 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2 parking spaces, and a spacious lawn, truly a magnificent property. In 1999, Teddy Gonzalez purchased the villa for 20,000 Australian dollars and began renovations. The family of 4 officially moved in December 2000. Teddy was a resilient man, born into a poor family in Baguio City, Philippines, in 1954. He was the 4th child in a family that struggled to make ends meet, but Teddy never blamed his circumstances. Instead, he worked hard and successfully gained admission to the law faculty at Baguio University. As Teddy approached graduation, he met a young woman named Mary Lou Claridad, a junior who was 3 years younger than him. The two fell in love at first sight. Mary, the eldest in her family, was gentle and kind-hearted. And like Teddy, she was also very hard-working. In 1977, shortly after Mary graduated, the two got married. Despite Teddy's dedication to his work, he remained a very romantic man in life, often surprising his wife with small gestures like unexpected flowers or candlelit dinners. On September 16, 1980, their son Seth Gonzalez was born. His name held a special significance that Teddy planned to reveal on Seth's 21st birthday. 3 years later, on July 9, 1983, their daughter Claudine was born. Starting as a lawyer, Teddy began to accumulate wealth through real estate and gradually expanded into various business ventures, including audio stores, hotels, and other industries. While Teddy was highly capable, his wife's family achieved even more. Mary's brother-in-law's father served as the mayor of Baguio City from 1986 to 1988, during which time Teddy held the position of secretary to the mayor. The family had succeeded both politically and in business. In 1989, Teddy used all of his savings to build a 4-story hotel with 40 rooms. The business was thriving, but less than a year later, a 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck Baguio City, claiming the lives of 142 people. In an instant, Teddy's career and home were destroyed. Worse still, during the earthquake, his son Seth was trapped in a stairwell. Teddy, risking his life, crawled into the crevice to rescue his son, an act of bravery that left him with a chronic ligament injury. Fortunately, the entire family emerged unscathed. Teddy and Mary believed they were blessed by a higher power. They rekindled their determination to rebuild their lives, but this time, they decided to emigrate to Australia, where Mary's sister Emily and her family were already living. In 1990, Teddy reviewed and retook the exams to obtain his law license in Australia. By 1993, He had opened an immigration law office, with Mary handling the internal management and coordination. Teddy took charge of external affairs and client acquisition. His skills quickly brought in a steady stream of clients, allowing them to swiftly join the middle class within their community. As devout Catholics, Teddy and Mary not only set up a home altar but also attended Mass 3 to 4 times a week. They placed great importance on their children's education, hoping they would achieve even greater success than themselves. As a result, they spared no expense in investing in their children's education while clearly rewarding and disciplining them to keep their focus on their studies. However, this inadvertently sowed the seeds of a tragedy that would unfold years later. On July 10, 2001, both Teddy and Mary drove separately to work while their son Seth had a busy day ahead. In the morning, he attended school, then spent the afternoon at his father's law office. That evening, he had plans with friends. Meanwhile, their daughter Claudine, enjoying her summer break, stayed home to relax, spending her time reading and chatting with friends. Yesterday had been Claudine's 18th birthday, and she still wanted to continue celebrating, texting her friends to make plans. But before she could finalize those plans, Claudine suddenly lost all contact at 11:45 p.m. Seth returned home. Within 3 minutes, he immediately called the police. This was the call you heard at the beginning of the video. Well, we're sending an ambulance now. Seth immediately ran to his neighbors for help, telling them, I saw 2 figures. The neighbors, in a panic, called the police again. Seeing that Seth still wanted to rush into the house, one neighbor held him back. Suddenly, Seth shouted, I know CPR, and before he could finish his sentence, he darted into the house. The neighbor, risking his own safety, followed Seth and dragged him back outside. Although the police and medical personnel arrived within minutes, it was already too late. Teddy, 46, Mary, 43, and their 18-year-old daughter Claudine were all dead. The medical staff discovered that none of them had been shot. They had been killed with a sharp object, with Mary's severe neck wound being particularly notable. A canine unit was then deployed to search for the 2 figures Seth claimed to have seen, but perhaps due to the rain that night, the dog couldn't find any traces. Seeing Seth collapse to the ground in despair, Senior Officer Mike approached to comfort him before asking about any recent unusual events. Seth recounted, after my sister's birthday party the night before, while the whole family was driving home, we were attacked on the road. A car sped past us, and someone yelled, Die, you Asians. That statement caught Mike's attention. He had been puzzled by the strange writing on the wall at the crime scene, but now he had alleged it could be a targeted attack against Asians. At 3 a.m. on July 11th, Seth provided the police with details of his activities that day. He explained that at the time of the crime, he had been out with friends, and the meeting wasn't spontaneous, it had been planned the day before. With a clear alibi, the police ruled out Seth as a suspect. On July 13th, Seth held a press conference and offered a $100,000 odd reward for any leads. It's a picture of the 4 corners of the world. In my world, we were the 4, he added, my family, friends, and myself would like to ask anyone out there to please help us. However, as the investigation delved deeper, numerous doubts began to arise, suggesting that this might not have been an attack targeting Asians. First, nearly $1,000 odd in cash remained untouched in Teddy and Mary's wallets, indicating that the motive was not robbery. The house was remarkably clean and tidy despite the fact that closets and drawers in every room had been left open, with the clothes inside neatly arranged as if on display. All 3 victims had been brutally murdered, with Mary suffering a severe neck wound. Claudine had sustained 7 stab wounds and multiple blunt force injuries. Force injuries were evidenced by the dent in the wall of her room. 2 knives missing from the kitchen were later identified as matching the victim's wounds. The 6 dogs in the house were unharmed and had been locked in the laundry room. The only sign of forced entry was in the kitchen, yet no fingerprints were found on the kitchen countertop. The investigation revealed that the window frame had been broken outwards. At the time of the crime, the victim's time of death varied, with the entire ordeal lasting at least 3 hours. After measuring the victim's body temperatures, investigators discovered that Claudine and Mary's body temperatures were lower than Teddy's, indicating that the mother and daughter had died first. Blood found on a briefcase and handbag at the scene suggested they had been deliberately placed there afterward rather than dropped during a struggle. This evidence led the police to shift the focus of their investigation. The first step was to determine the exact time of death for each victim by examining the logs of the last phone calls. They deduced that Claudine was likely murdered between 4:10 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. as her last text message was sent at 4:10 p.m., and the open book on her desk indicated she was studying at the time. Mary's time of death was estimated to be around 5:30 p.m. that day. She left work at 4:50 p.m. and would have driven home in 30 to 40 minutes. She was likely killed as soon as she entered the house, which was evident from the shoes she was still wearing. Normally, after arriving home, she would have changed her shoes and placed her handbag in one of two specific spots. Teddy's time of death was estimated to be around 7 p.m. After leaving work at 6:23 p.m., he made 2 phone calls to his home. Teddy was likely killed as soon as he entered the house, as indicated by his work attire and the briefcase beside him. If this had been an attack targeting Asians, the assailant wouldn't have patiently waited for each family member to return home, nor would they have forgotten to bring a weapon, forcing them to use whatever was available on the scene. After killing everyone, the perpetrator even took the time to shower, as evidenced by the water found on the bathroom floor. 6 days after the incident, the police asked Seth to recount the events of that night in detail. This time, they noticed inconsistencies in his story. Seth claimed that he arrived at the front of his house around 6 p.m. but didn't get out of the car because he received a text message from friends saying that dinner had been delayed by 2 hours. With it raining at the time, Seth chose not to go inside and instead called the house phone, but no one answered. He then drove to another location, intending to meet up with a different friend in Blackdown, a town 28 kilometers away. Since this friend had recently moved, Seth spent 2 hours searching for the new address without success. He finally met his friend at 8 p.m. and the two had dinner and played video games together. Seth stated that he drove home at 11:45 p.m. and then called the police. He particularly emphasized that when he found his sister Claudine, she was bleeding, and he had attempted to administer first aid. However, the claim that Seth couldn't find his friend's new address after searching for 2 hours was clearly illogical. Additionally, the report directly contradicted Seth's second statement. Claudine had been dead for a considerable time before being discovered, so she could not have been bleeding, and her heart was certainly no longer beating. Furthermore, there were no signs of CPR having been performed on her body. Seth had also mentioned seeing figures, but after multiple police reenactments of the scene, they concluded that the noise created by Seth driving into the garage and entering the house would have been loud enough to alert any intruders, giving them ample time to flee. It would have been impossible for Seth to see anyone if there had been someone there. This led the police to suspect that Seth, the sole survivor of the family, might be deeply involved in the crime. They focused on searching his room and discovered a piece of clothing with traces of blue paint that matched the writing on the wall at the crime scene. They also seized his computer and an empty shoebox. By purchasing an identical pair of shoes, the police compared them with the bloody footprints at the scene and found a match. Furthermore, Seth's internet search history from February to July 2001, spanning nearly 6 months, was filled with searches related to plant poisons. Following this lead, the police discovered that Seth had purchased highly toxic plant seeds on June 24, though the name of the plant was prohibited from being disclosed under a government order. Coincidentally, a week before the murders, on July 3, Seth's mother Mary had been hospitalized with severe stomach pain and diarrhea, requiring a day of emergency care before her condition improved. At the time, the doctors diagnosed her with colitis, as her test results did not align with food poisoning. However, the police now had reason to believe that Mary had been poisoned with those plant seeds. On August 3, during Seth's third police interrogation, he claimed that he had purchased the toxic seeds because he was heartbroken and had become disillusioned with life. This was yet another clumsy lie, but without direct evidence, the police were unable to charge Seth. They decided to release him while simultaneously wiretapping his phone and implementing a parallel strategy to trap him. Interestingly, it wasn't just the police who were suspicious of Seth. His friends and family also noticed something was off. For instance, on the day of the press conference, Seth deliberately met with the family accountant to inquire about the inheritance. At the funeral, he sang the song One Sweet Day, leaving more than 300 guests shocked. Afterward, he moved into his mother's car. 2 months after the incident, Seth lied, claiming he had brain cancer and needed $190,000 for surgery. He even sent fake medical documents to his relatives in an attempt to scam them for money. However, those fake documents ended up in the hands of the police. As a result, not only did Seth fail to get the $190,000, but his government compensation payments were also suspended. Running out of money, Seth started selling off valuables like jewelry, watches, and his parents' cars as soon as he had some cash in hand. Seth immediately ordered a Lexus worth $173,000 AUD. The salesperson, sensing something was off, cautioned him, saying, "This car is expensive." But Seth replied without hesitation, "Don't worry, I've inherited money." Seth's Aunt Emily also had a strange encounter on the night of the murders. Around 6 p.m., while picking up her son from school, she stopped by her sister's house. She noticed a car parked in the garage, but the house was eerily dark and quiet. Emily rang the doorbell 3 times, but no one answered. She was about to walk around to the side door to look inside when she saw a figure moving inside the house. At first, she thought it was a coat rack, but as she looked closer, she remembered that her sister's house had 6 dogs, yet she hadn't heard a single bark. The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt, so she took her son home. She distinctly recalled that it hadn't started raining at that time. In addition to Emily, Mary's sister, one of Teddy's clients, also reported seeing Seth's car. This client had arrived to deliver documents between 4:15 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. and noticed Seth's car parked in the garage. Seth's car was unmistakable, a blue Ford that was easily recognizable. By 2 months after the crime, the police's undercover sting operation had started to pay off. An undercover officer befriended Seth by complimenting his fashion sense. Once they grew closer, the officer intentionally bragged about having an informant at the police station. Seth fell for the trap and asked the officer to gather information about his family's case. Following instructions, the undercover officer deliberately mentioned to Seth that someone had seen his car parked in the garage around 4 p.m. on the day of the murders. The police wanted to see how Seth would try to cover up this lie. Sure enough, after learning this, Seth quietly began preparing a second alibi. By January 2002, he casually confronted the police and changed his story, claiming, "I actually arrived home before 4:30 p.m. but didn't go inside. Instead, I took a taxi from home to a brothel to unwind." Seth explained that he hadn't mentioned this earlier because he was embarrassed to admit it. However, Seth didn't realize that his phone had been tapped. He repeatedly called the brothel, asking questions like, "Do you have security cameras? How long have you been open? And do you keep copies of your guest registry?" All these conversations were recorded by the police. More importantly, the prostitute Seth referred to had been on leave for a week and wasn't there on the days surrounding the crime. When his lie was exposed, Seth claimed he might have mistaken the person involved. He even arranged for a taxi driver to testify on his behalf. However, it was later revealed that the taxi driver had been paid $50 AUD by Seth to write and sign a fake statement. At this point, the police were confident that Seth was the perpetrator, but they still needed more concrete evidence before they could formally charge him. Interestingly, the crucial evidence that the police were struggling to find was unwittingly provided by Seth himself. After hearing the confidential information from the undercover officer about someone seeing his car at 4:30 p.m., Seth became fully convinced that the officer had an informant within the police department. As a result, he asked the officer to gather more information and even sent along a sketch of the crime scene that he had drawn himself. The sketch included carefully noted times of death for each victim. It's important to note that the police had never released detailed information about the victims' times of death to the public. Besides the police, only the perpetrator would have known these details. Moreover, the handwriting on the sketch matched the writing found at the crime scene. Notably, before Seth was officially arrested, a seemingly orchestrated event occurred on the evening of June 2, 2002. The police received a report of an assault around 8:30 p.m. When they arrived at the scene, they found Seth lying in a ditch with minor facial injuries. Seth claimed that someone had put a plastic bag over his head and attacked him, but he couldn't identify the assailant. However, after an examination, the doctor concluded that Seth had no head injuries. This clumsy charade gave the police a new lead. Seth had mentioned the executor of the will, who happened to be his grandmother. It turned out that on February 23, 1998, Teddy and Mary had created a joint will. The will stipulated that if one spouse passed away, the surviving spouse would inherit all the assets, and if both died, the assets would be equally divided between Seth and Claudine. The grandmother was named as the will's executor. The police were concerned that Seth might attempt another scheme, perhaps even staging an attack on his grandmother to make it appear as though she had died accidentally. The investigation could not be delayed any longer. At 8 a.m. on June 13, 2002, the police executed a warrant for Seth's arrest on charges of murder. After his arrest, little-known details about the family began to surface, shedding light on the possible reasons why Seth committed such a heinous act against his own loved ones. In the past, Teddy and Mary worked tirelessly and ultimately achieved the life they had always wanted. After years of effort, they accumulated a wealth of approximately 1.5 million AUD. They were not only strict with themselves but also with their children. Anyone who performed well was praised, which instilled in Seth a deep desire for recognition from a young age. Seth's parents had high hopes for him to become a cardiac surgeon, while they envisioned his sister becoming a teacher. However, in reality, Seth struggled academically and had a strong passion for singing. After graduating from high school, he was not accepted into any university programs for medicine or law. In 1999, Teddy did everything he could to get Seth into the medical program at the University of New South Wales. His parents demanded that he give up his singing and focus on his studies. They also arranged for him to do odd jobs at the family law office, hoping that even if he couldn't become a doctor, he could at least inherit the family business. But no one could have predicted that just 2 years later, Seth would drop out of school, claiming that he was too busy, so busy that he didn't have time to attend classes. Seth was not only the lead singer of the band Definite Viz, but also had a fan club and a website created by his fans. The website featured photos of Seth performing, showing off his physique, surrounded by beautiful women. With his rising career, there was no time left for studying, much to the frustration of his father, Teddy. By mid-2000, Teddy enrolled Seth in law school at Macquarie University. To encourage his son, he even gifted him a car. Seth loved the car and even had a personalized license plate made with his name on it. Strangely, after that, Seth's academic performance suddenly improved dramatically, and he consistently maintained high grades. Every time his report card arrived, Seth was overjoyed because his parents would shower him with praise. On one occasion, Seth even kindly showed his sister how to secretly change her grade from 75 to 99.9, but he was immediately reprimanded by his parents, who warned him that if he didn't focus on his studies, they would take away his car. Seth's sister didn't just tell their parents about him altering his grades, she also revealed another of his secrets. Seth had a long history of bedwetting, even into adulthood, and every time it happened, their mother, Mary, had to wash his clothes and bed linens. Mary would sometimes nag him, saying, "You should see a psychologist." This embarrassing situation became a source of ridicule within the family, and it's possible that this contributed to Seth developing the idea of poisoning them. Of course, Seth's parents were also strict with their daughter. When they discovered she was dating at a young age, they immediately sent her to Melbourne to complete her high school education. Seth even helped his parents by sending threatening emails to his sister's boyfriend to break up the relationship. Coincidentally, at the end of May 2001, Seth's girlfriend of just 2 weeks wanted to break up with him. In an attempt to win her back, Seth gave her a necklace and promised to introduce her to his parents. Predictably, this led to punishment similar to what his sister had faced. When Seth tried to resist, his mother told him, "If you go back to that girl, you won't be welcome in this family anymore." Seth realized that he was increasingly losing control over his own life. He was constantly being threatened by his family with the loss of his car, being cut off, or being disinherited. All of this felt like a ticking time bomb for Seth, and the trigger was his poor grades in 2 of his courses. He had tried to use a medical certificate for an upper respiratory infection to request a retake, but his plea was denied. Seth recalled his parents' harsh words, "If you don't study properly, you should go back to the Philippines. Everything here in Australia will no longer be yours." Seth was unwilling to accept that everything his parents owned would eventually belong to him anyway. He thought how much better it would be if he could decide everything for himself. On June 24th, Seth began his plan to poison his family. That day, he ordered a batch of toxic plant seeds. When he checked the order the next day, he saw that it hadn't been shipped, only to learn that the supplier was on holiday. Seth quickly sent them an email, lying by saying, "My mother is about to turn 60, and these seeds I ordered are meant to be a birthday gift for her this weekend. She saw them in Florida last year and loved them, so I was hoping you could expedite the delivery." In reality, Seth's mother was 43 years old that year, and she had never been to Florida. On June 29th, Seth received the seeds as he had hoped, which arrived on that Friday. After getting the seeds, he soaked them in hot water and then mixed the infused water into his mother's food. On July 1st, Seth's mother began showing unusual symptoms. By July 3rd, she had to be hospitalized for emergency care. On the afternoon of July 4th, she was discharged with her health stabilized. To create the false impression that his mother had been poisoned by food, on July 2nd, Seth wrote 3 letters and sent them to his mother's favorite food manufacturer, the police station, and the health department. The letter to the manufacturer read, "3 of your products have been poisoned and are currently on the market. Ha ha. This is what you get for mistreating your employees." The other 2 letters accused the factory of poor management, claiming they had compromised food safety, failed to recall the harmful products in time, and did not apologize to the public. Seth's goal was to make everyone believe that his mother died from food poisoning, thus diverting suspicion away from himself. He even pretended to have a stomach ache while at the hospital. However, what Seth didn't anticipate was that his mother would recover. Later, the police speculated that Seth likely extracted the toxin incorrectly. A few days later, on July 6th, Seth had a heated argument with his mother about breaking up with his girlfriend. Mary scolded Seth, saying, "If you keep seeing her, don't bother stepping foot in this house again." Seth was all too familiar with these kinds of threats. His sister had been sent to Melbourne to study because of a similar situation. Seth was deeply distressed and terrified at the thought of being sent back to the Philippines. He felt suffocated by the pressure, especially recently with his sister home for the summer. The contrast in their parents' treatment of the 2 siblings was stark. His sister received constant praise, while Seth faced harsh criticism. After his sister's birthday party on July 9th, Seth felt increasingly isolated by his family. His car had been confiscated, his allowance reduced, and once his grades were revealed, he knew his situation would only worsen. As he dwelled on these thoughts, his anxiety grew. He no longer only harbored thoughts of harming his mother, but now also considered eliminating his father and sister, who would compete with him for the inheritance. Knowing that his sister would return to Melbourne on July 12th, Seth decided to act the next day. He had already made dinner plans with a friend for 8 p.m. the following morning. Seth went to school and worked at the family company as usual. At 4:15 p.m. he returned home, retrieved a baseball bat he had prepared in his car trunk but felt it wasn't enough. He then went to the kitchen and took the 2 longest knives he could find. Seth quietly went upstairs to his sister's room, and at that moment, all the resentment and humiliation he had endured over the years came flooding back. At 5:30 p.m., as soon as he saw his mother enter the house, Seth attacked her. By this point, Seth had completely lost control. He patiently waited for over an hour until his father Teddy came home. After finishing what he had set out to do, Seth began to stage the scene. He tossed around the briefcase, ransacked the closets, and forced open the kitchen window. Then, he changed out of his blood-stained clothes and took a shower. Finally, Seth tried to make it look like a racially motivated attack by spray-painting racist slurs on the walls. However, the paint residue on Seth's jacket gave him away, serving as the only evidence placing him at the crime scene. After 7 p.m. Seth disposed of the weapons and then met up with his friend as planned. They had dinner at Planet Hollywood and spent the rest of the evening playing arcade games until after 11 p.m. Seth was desperately hoping that someone would discover his family while he was out, which would give him the perfect alibi. However, when he returned home, the house was eerily silent. By 11:45 p.m. he realized he had to call the police himself. Earlier, while hiding at home, Seth had seen someone arrive around 6 p.m., which is why he initially fabricated the lie about being at the front door at that time. But Seth didn't know that a client of his father had actually come by at 4:30 p.m. and had seen his car there. Throughout his life, lying had become second nature to Seth. Hardly anything he said was true, especially when it came to building an image of success for himself. Seth lied so boldly that, in the eyes of his friends, he was a world boxing champion, a future music star, and the performance of One Sweet Day at the funeral had supposedly earned him $1 million recording contract. He also claimed to have a stable job at the family's law office and own the modeling agency. The models featured on his fan club's website were just a fraction of the lies he told. But lies, like soap bubbles, can only obscure the truth temporarily before they eventually burst. On May 20, 2004, Seth was sentenced to 3 life sentences and an additional sentence for threatening to contaminate food. Although Seth continued to assert his innocence, the jury in the trial took note of a rare poisonous plant found in Seth's garden. It was the very seeds he had carelessly discarded, which had now become the most concrete evidence against him. Seth might have been skilled at lying, but his attention to detail was utterly terrible. Remember the fan club website? You've probably guessed it, Seth created it himself. In 2003, the family home was put up for sale. The once happy home had now become a haunted house in Sydney that no one wanted to touch. In August 2004, a Buddhist couple from Taiwan, attracted by the home's location and layout, especially the altar on the second floor, decided to purchase it without thoroughly researching its history. They placed a deposit of $80,000 AUD. However, after reading about the events that had taken place in the house, they felt deceived and demanded a refund from the real estate agency. Initially, the company refused to return their money, with the 2 agents responsible insisting, "We did nothing wrong. If you didn't ask, why should we tell?" The situation escalated, and the local fair trading office launched an investigation. Ultimately, the $80,000 deposit was refunded, and the real estate agents were fined $221,000 odd for violating fair trading laws. Additionally, the local real estate association was required to revise its regulations regarding the advertising and sale of properties to ensure full disclosure to buyers. From then on, a sign was placed in front of the house stating this was the home of the Gonzalez family. The property's value continued to decline until, on October 7, 2005, a mysterious bear purchased the house for $720,000 odd. This bear told Women's Day magazine that they would not let the house's past ruin their dream home. On March 26, 2001, Seth's third appeal was denied. He is now serving a life sentence as a high-risk inmate at Lithgow Correctional Centre in New South Wales. As for the meaning behind the name Seth Gonzalez, which his father had promised to reveal on Seth's 21st birthday, it seems Seth will never know and has no right to face his father. Now, that concludes today's case. What are your thoughts on the identity and motives of the perpetrator in this case? Share your opinions with us below. Goodbye and see you next time.